Senate Budget Committee, Denise Moreno-Duchesne, who will make some comments in a moment. And I just watched the governor's presentation of the May revision, and I want to provide you with my response. Senator Duchesne will then provide a response, and then we'll be happy to answer your questions. I could speak for a long time about the past and where to point the finger. I could talk about sledgehammers and automobiles and torn up credit cards. I could talk about blowing up boxes. I could talk about one of many silly metaphors. But I will leave it at this. I am disappointed that the governor has chosen to surrender, that he sees California as unfixable, and that he proposes a budget that kills the economy and harms so many. It is a non-starter. If, God forbid, this budget became reality, California would be the only state in the union to not have a safety net for children. Leadership is not about blaming others. It's about finding solutions to tough problems to preserve the state and its people. In their comments throughout the day, the governor's representatives have described the cuts he proposes as, quote, terrible. I believe him. But his actions say it would be more terrible to delay $2.1 billion in corporate tax breaks than to save children, the elderly, and the most vulnerable. His actions say it is more terrible to avoid a tax on oil profits than complete elimination of county mental health services and child care. He appears to have decided that the solutions are too difficult to achieve, so he will accept these terrible cuts. We refuse to wave the white flag. California's elected leaders, including myself and the governor and the others, need to stand up. Given the choice between enacting $6 billion in cuts to services for the elderly, the children, and the disabled, or delaying corporate tax breaks, I'm for delaying corporate tax breaks. Given the choice between cutting education by nearly $3 billion or seeking revenues from oil companies extracting oil in California, I'm for getting revenues from oil companies profiting handsomely in this state. But I want to go beyond, I think, what you expect here, which is sort of the give and take and the recitation of our genuinely held beliefs and philosophy. I want to state my perspective on the overall situation very, very clearly. In my view, having now my 10th year in the legislature, second year as leader, having served on numerous budget conference committees, we have come to the end of trying to prop up this failed structure. There is no more triage. The status quo is unsustainable. Our government is not structured to quickly and effectively respond to an economic crisis of this magnitude. We are so balkanized that the people don't know who collects the taxes and who provides the services. Yes, we need revenue, and we will fight for revenue, but not to prop up this outdated structure. We must use this crisis now, not next year, not another report, not another study. We need to bring government closer to the people. The inside term is realignment. What it means to the people of California is that we must take many of these state programs that otherwise may be decimated and give them to the locals and the school districts, give them restored revenue and the ability to raise revenue themselves. This is not theory. This is not academic. This is not a luxury. Those who say too difficult, too complicated, I challenge you to do this. Bring forward an alternative that balances the budget, preserves essential public investments, and does not rely on gimmicks. Finally, I do want to respond to one thing that the governor highlighted in his comments about the tax structure. I think we all agree that California's tax structure needs updating. But to say that we are living through this budget crisis solely or primarily because of the tax structure is just plain wrong. The legislative analysts said clearly that if we had adopted the Parsky Commission's recommendations, that revenue would actually drop $10 billion. And the governor has this theory about the GDP that he keeps talking about, but this is what we know about California. Personal consumption in California has fallen by the largest percentage since 1980. Home prices have plunged dramatically since 2007, from an average of $484,000 a home to $250,000. The share of corporate income tax paid in California has fallen by nearly half since 1981. So this idea that if our tax structure had only kept up with some phantom robust growth in our economy over the last couple of years, this country, the world, and this state are living through the most precipitous drop in revenue, and it would be precipitous no matter what tax system we had. The real answer here is we must restructure and realign this outdated structure that we have here in California, and we need to provide the revenue to the entity that is in the best place to provide the services. Senator Ducheney, please come on, make a couple comments, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you very much, Senator Steinberg and all of you. This is just a sad budget day. You have a governor who says this reflects his vision and values, and if this reflects the vision and values of the governor of this state, we are in big trouble. Because this does not reflect, I think, California. The governor has clearly chosen, as he said, sort of throw it to the legislature. He's abdicated whatever responsibility he may have had as governor. He's abdicated responsibility for finding solutions because he refuses to acknowledge his own co-complicity and responsibility for creating a lot of the situation we're in. Simply in the last year, he points to the erosions. But the addition I've been keeping in subcommittee suggests that at least we have lost at least $1 billion this year due to unilateral decisions of the governor that cost us money, or proposals that we acquiesced to at his insistence that he said would save money, but in fact cost us money. Most of his solutions and a lot of the problem as they are defining it are the promises he made that his administration would find savings through an assortment of proposals that the legislature was talked into. And in fact, every time we've done that, he's delivered deeper deficits. I think all of us have to accept responsibility for some of our mistakes. And one of our biggest ones has been actually believing him over the last 5 years. When he said he didn't want more debt, and we increased the debt. When he said we wanted to do rainy day fund, we did a rainy day fund. We did have votes in 2004. We've done a lot of these things. I sat on the Performance Review Commission that had a lot of great ideas that the governor immediately abandoned and has refused to revisit. And what we've seen through the budget hearings is that a lot of the erosion problems are the lack of management in our system. One of the reasons to restructure is because clearly this governor, at least this governor, has not been able to manage the bureaucracy in any fashion that could show savings. People talk a lot about the comparisons between government and private companies, but when Ford and General Motors had problems last year, they brought their workers to the table, and the workers and the company together figured out ways that everybody could find ways to create savings, keep the company going. And what happened? Ford now is showing a profit. Workers are at work. More workers are coming back to work. Unfortunately, here in the state, what we have is the opposite. Somebody who claims to be a business governor who has refused for 6 years to talk to the employees who are on the front lines, who know what's going on, who offer savings alternatives, who offered real ones, unlike the ones that the governor has proposed. The governor proposes ones, and we've told him we thought some of them were illegal. We thought some of them wouldn't work. We were reasonably convinced that furloughing people who were funded by federal special funds and people who are charged with the duty of collecting our taxes would have cost us money, and sure enough, it cost us over $1 billion. And now he comes forward with a solution, in theory, that with a vision and a value that says children have no value, but corporate tax breaks that have not yet been enacted, not new taxes, corporate tax breaks that do not exist today have greater value than the children of California. That is simply not the vision, I think, of the voters of California. We have heard this song before, and I think, our challenge in the next few weeks is to actually sort of rewrite a budget that makes sense, as Senator Steinberg points out, to restructure, to tell 500,000 families that they shall be homeless in lieu of delaying corporate tax breaks. It's just sort of an anomaly that's just really hard to even understand. On top of that, you sort of have the other interesting juxtaposition, which is asking the federal government, and we've all been back there in the last few months, pushing for, as much as we can get out of things like FMAP extension and TANF extensions. And so we're talking now about $4 billion, which is a more realistic number than the governor's January number. And yet he wants to give back $4 billion that supports children and keeps working families able to try to keep going to work. The total elimination of child care. You cannot build an economy and say, we want to create jobs and we want more people to go back to work if you're telling them they can't have child care, and tell them in the same breath that you can't have child care. CalWorks works because what it does is help people find work. It helps families sustain themselves while they look for work and not have to worry about their children because they have child care and Medi-Cal. That's what CalWorks does. The governor has never seemed to understand the program, and this is the obvious example. The devastating effect on this economy, we think as many as, I think it was about 100,000 small businesses, that would be child care providers in this state, will go under if the governor's proposal were to become law. That is simply not an acceptable vision of California. To destroy California businesses, to provide tax breaks to out-of-state companies is sort of an amazing juxtaposition for somebody who points out that the GDP has, in fact, improved over the last 3 or 4 years, and that somehow California, the 8th largest economy in the world, cannot afford to support its children. That's just not the budget that we will create or vote for.
Thank you. We'll take questions. Yes.
Having worked my way through Bronson's realignment program and hurt my interest, showing the age.
T-RAF all over.
Yes.
Yeah, been there, done that.
Explain to us a little bit about your specific programs and specific taxes you'd like to pass through to the counties and what that is.
Sure. I mean, I can give you a general outline here. Realignment only works if there is restored revenue, and I say restored revenue. You could look at the vehicle license fee again, which is one possibility, and or you give local governments the ability to raise revenue on their own and then shift some of what the state is providing to the locals. And let me tell you why this is the right thing to do. 32 years after the passage of Prop 13, there is a mismatch between resources and responsibility. The state is essentially a pass-through. That's what we are. And it ain't working. The local governments, the school districts, they're all angry at it. No one knows who to blame because the entity that raises the money does not provide the service. And all of the reform reports have been very clear that if you want to really fix the problem, you bring government closer to the people but you give the government that's closer to the people the ability to impact the revenue side of the budget. So where would I start? First of all, I would start in delaying these corporate tax breaks. That's one source of funding the beginning of a realignment. Two, we know at the county level, for example, that millions of people are going to be on Medicaid, fully paid by the federal government until 2017. And that will free up significant resources at the county level that currently go to providing care to indigents. That could be in the billions of dollars. Then you look at the fact that we did, in fact, impose some, quote, temporary taxes last year as part of the $60 billion overall budget solution. We need to talk about extending those. And there are streams of revenue, if you will, to be able to avoid this unacceptable proposal. I mean, Senator Cheney put it very well. What kind of civilized society maintains business tax breaks and eliminates child care? That's not California that I recognize or take pride in living in. And so there are. So let's get. Governor wants to get creative. You know, this is his 7th year as governor. I believe in 7th chances. You know, this is one more chance to dig in and be serious about changing what is a broken structure.
If I may follow up, what programs do you want
Well,
the county to take over? Do you want to give them money?
here are the categories. We got to talk about it, but I'll give you the categories. We're talking about health and human services, and we're talking about corrections, public safety, and child welfare. We may be talking about, you know, there may be something to look at in the education area as well. You know, Senator Samiti and others have bills to allow for less than a 2/3 supermajority to pass a parcel tax for local school districts. I mean, it's all part of the mix.
Harrisburg and California Parliament are pushing this idea of realignment. They talk about counties being given the power to elect local sales taxes for revenues. Is that the sort of thing that you're also interested in?
Yes. Sure, you got to give them some authority over the revenue side of the equation. As I said earlier, this isn't a luxury. This isn't now theoretical. If this is the construct that's being presented, $13+ billion of cuts that are completely unacceptable to the majority party, and the Republicans are not going to vote to raise revenue to prop up the state, the current system that we have, the intelligent alternative is to add revenue, but make it part of an intelligent restructuring that is essential. Go ahead, Denise. Do you want to add?
Well, I mean, I just, you know, there's a huge opportunity there that we are still just starting to begin to try to figure out how to explore, but there are opportunities for savings in health care based on the new federal law.
That's right.
And additional federal funds. And opportunities to do some things that California has wanted to do in the past, but you need federal waivers and all of these things. But now is the chance to do integrated health care services. And for senior citizens and for those who are the most costly Medi-Cal patients, to have integrated health care with a medical home, which is a model that is suggested in the federal law. We are in a position to almost do that quickly because we have had Medi-Cal managed care in this state. And to integrate our IHSS services with our Medi-Cal services, with our adult day health care services, and save money in the overall system by actually providing better care. So those are examples.
It's time to get intelligent.
If you had this realignment proposal, though, and switch the tax collection authority and the service to the locals, if it's still dependent on income and sales taxes, I mean, aren't we still going to see the same volatility in the income stream?
Well, you have to create headroom. There's a number of ways to create headroom. One, we've talked about these corporate breaks that don't have to go into effect immediately. Two, as Senator Cheney said, and I said earlier, federal health care reform will free up from $2 to $4 billion that is currently being spent mostly by counties mostly by counties, to provide health care to indigents. And then there are restored revenue sources like the VLF and others that could be used as part of a restructuring, reorganizing of this government.
What I'm asking is, would you like to see property tax be part of this?
No. No, we're not going to touch residential property tax, obviously.
You mentioned extending the
Jim had the next question. I'm sorry, Brian.
I just want to know if you can or will say outright that you will not pass a budget that eliminates CalWORKs.
I will not. We will not pass a budget that eliminates CalWORKs outright. We will not be party to devastating children and families. Period. It's not why we came here. It's not what we believe in. And as Senator Cheney said, more importantly, the people of California don't believe in eliminating help for people who most need it, especially kids. No way.
The cost of the programs, I didn't get into.
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Tax break rollbacks are kind of ground zero. I didn't count how many times you mentioned that today, but it was a few. So
17 and a half,
is that
I think.
kind of enough? Is that where you? Is that a
That's where we start.
Unless you're going to talk about that, you're not.
That, well, obviously there's revenue, there's cuts, and there's restructuring. We've, just so the record is clear, we have participated, in fact, voted for over $30 billion worth of cuts over the last year and a half. And, we always act responsibly, but we're not going to put California behind Mississippi and other states.
I mean, the irony of it is that they're exactly the same number. So the corporate tax breaks is over $2 billion. The state cost of CalWORKs is less than $2 billion. And for that, you're giving up $4 billion to the economy in the federal funds that come to support CalWORKs. So the whole thing doesn't make sense. A lot of these proposals of the governor's cost, as we found last year, they cost more money than they save. He calls them cuts. Finance scores them that way, but they refuse to score the cost. I've been fighting with them all year. They're finally going to score the $500 million that their furlough decisions cost us. But they aren't scoring the cost of jails and foster care and child welfare services if their CalWORKs proposal were to take effect. They refuse to score the cost of their proposals.
Yep. Well, pension reform. Let's talk about that. First of all, on the issue of pension reform, not a single reform idea will do a thing to help us in this year's budget or for budgets for the next decade or more. Is it a subject that needs to be talked about? Absolutely. Is it a subject that first ought to be discussed across the bargaining table? Yes. And in fact, as we speak, I know that the Department of Personnel Administration and most of the public employee unions in California are sitting down and beginning to have those conversations. But it's another one of those for maybe it's a negotiating tactic. I don't know. I mean, I know what I'm most interested in when I prioritize, and that is saving essential services for people, for kids, saving essential services for kids, the elderly, and the vulnerable. That's number one to me. Brian, I'm sorry, Brian.
That's okay. You mentioned extending the temporary tax increases from last year. The voters already rejected that. How do you feel like that the environment has changed among voters?
Well, we all have our different opinion on that. The voters also rejected the very spending cap that Democrats, of course, were willing to go along with, and they said no. Look, people expect us to lead. And to educate the public and to make the case. And first, we need to come together on a solution that not only is more fair than this, but also genuinely changes what we know is broken. Wyatt?
The governor said that he won't pass a budget without budget reform, pension reform. Is that going to be part of the negotiations? Are you open to that? And then he said he thinks it can be done by June 15th. How realistic is that?
I don't. This is 1 year. We all want to get the budget done on time, but I will tell you that goal is a distant second to fixing this broken structure and to gaining a much more fair result for people who need help the most, especially kids and the elderly. Yeah, and Denise said this proposal probably sets us back a number of weeks. But, so look we all want an on-time budget, but not nearly as important to me as what's at stake here for real people.
What's the danger of a late budget this year?
Well, we know one bit of good news. Our cash situation's better than last year. But that's not indefinite, and that's not any kind of a excuse to not do everything we can to get the budget done as quickly as possible. But we need to get it done right before we get it done fast.
Given the nature of the deficit this year, and even if the governor went along with the delays in tax rates, is this the right year to raise funding for higher education when you're talking about keeping it flat in K-12, and you're talking about...
Be honest with you. I'm a graduate or an alumni of 3 University of Californias. I love the higher education system in California and want nothing more than to augment their budgets. But the answer to your question is no. Can't do it. Not under this structure. What are you're going to eliminate the safety net for kids in this state and to the elderly and increase funding in any area? I can't get my head around that. Love to increase funding for higher education. Maybe with some new revenue, we can do that. But otherwise, can't see it.
I was wondering, I think Senator Ducheney is the closest thing we have to a wonk.
Yes, she is.
If you could run down, eliminating cow work, eliminating childcare, what exactly does that mean? His proposal, if you've had a chance to see it, what exactly is he going to do? 500,000 people on cow work and the children who receive subsidies.
Well, that's the problem. I have not. I have not. I mean, they handed it to me when I walked into the press conference. I haven't seen his paper on. But my sense for it is that just as the last 3 times he's proposed this, that they propose nothing, and so they do make no acknowledgement for the costs of those 500,000 families not working, not having child care, not getting employment services, not getting domestic violence counseling, not getting mental health services, not getting substance abuse services. They make no account for that.
So then the child care that he's speaking of is
both.
Exclusively
No.
within the...
No. He eliminated child care both for CalWORKs and for non-CalWORKs subsidized child care, which is why I think the number of folks, of businesses who will be impacted is somewhere on the neighborhood of 50,000. Child care centers who could be at risk as businesses, because most of them have sort of a mix of clients who do not get subsidies, clients who get lesser subsidies because it's a scaled subsidy, and CalWORKs clients who are fully subsidized. And so, you lose half of that, you don't have a business.
The proposal last year and presumably again this year is that there will continue to be cash grants at some level.
No, he said eliminate. There is no way to do this except to eliminate.
Right?
Yeah, there's no unless the counties, and that goes to this cost shifting. Counties do have an obligation to provide indigent services. So you're going to add the 500,000 families to the county's indigent rolls. They will be homeless. What's the cost of that to your criminal justice system? What's the cost of that to your child welfare system? Which he probably also doesn't restore to current levels, would be my guess. And what's the cost of that in things like health care and the loss of truancy, dropouts, future costs that are very long term. He basically abandons children under 6. He says we can have before care and after school care if you're in school. But if you're not in school yet, we'll just abandon you. And it's just a sort of a phenomenal concept if you have any hope. Maybe he's planning to move to Idaho after this year is over and he doesn't care, but it's hard to believe.
That's not a scoop or anything that he's moved to.
How would you live in this state?
Any more questions? Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thanks. Okay.
Yes. Sort of summarize quickly your reaction. I mean,